Here's where I'm at on this diesel swap. I got an axle in the front, I got an axle in the back, and now it's time to take that Cummins and set it in the Explorer chassis. These are the motor mounts that fit on the Cummins engine, and these are what they sat in the frame of the Ram. These sit right in there. What I need to do now is modify these so that they sit in the right place on the engine so it'll fit in the chassis, and then weld these onto the chassis. Here's approximately where the engine's gonna sit. Obviously rotate it a little bit, but it's gonna sit approximately right here. And you can see the only issue with that is the bolt holes for the motor mount are right there. And if I were to bolt the motor mount down there, the frame's in the way. I think I found what I think will be an elegant solution to this motor mount problem. So typically the motor mount mounts to those 3 bolt holes there. However, this grounding strap here, and there's another one on the other side, if I remove that, then I could actually take the motor mount and put it up there, which gives me about 3 inches, which is all I need. So I'm just going to bolt it up into these upper bolts, and then I'll cut it off here and move that 3rd bolt hole back down so I'm still mounted in 3 locations. And then that way I won't even have to make a custom plate or anything, just do a little bit of a modification of this plate. This should be a reasonably elegant solution. Then I can hopefully find exactly how I want to weld this mount to the frame. Now, in order to make sure that I have the positioning of the Cummins in the chassis just perfect, I want to put the body on here so that I can make sure that the positioning's perfect. So what I need to do now is pick that Explorer's body up high enough that I can roll the chassis underneath it and then mock up the 6BT in the chassis. So let's get to it. Well, that didn't take long for disaster to strike. I was pulling on the front of the car and I didn't realize that taillight actually ran into this part of the jack. So yeah, I just busted my taillight, but luckily I have another taillight on the other Explorer, so it's not that big of a deal, but whoops. Now, I don't want anyone to get the impression that this is a how-to. What I've decided to do is remove this door so I don't damage it like the brake light. And I am going to see if I can get the cherry picker high enough in order to roll the chassis underneath it. You guys might not ever see this video if it doesn't work. You'll probably see it if something goes catastrophically wrong. Either way, let's see what happens. I went ahead and took the tires out of the rear and put carts there instead. That drops it lower a little and helps me hopefully scoot it to the side easier, so let's see. What do you think? Should I just leave it like that? 10 inches of body lift, monster truck Explorer? No? You don't think so? Fine. If it's stupid, but it works, then it ain't stupid. I got the body put on the chassis. I got a couple of the body bolts back in it so it's not gonna move around. This full-size front and rear actually isn't all that bad. I thought that the front and rear were gonna stick out horrendously far, and obviously they do stick out. But they stick out a lot less than I was expecting. It'll be a little worse with bigger tires on it. I think these are 10.5 inch wide. But for now, that doesn't look half bad. Let's get that Cummins mocked up. Here comes the part of the engine swap process where I try and get the engine in the engine bay, figure out what's in the way and what it's hitting on, cut that thing out of there, repeat until I actually get this engine to fit in there. Now I imagine that I'm probably gonna have to do a body lift in order to actually get it to fit, but for now I wanna see how close I can get it without a body lift. The lower the body lift, the better, because my center of gravity will be lower. So if I could get it without a body lift, that would be amazing, but I don't anticipate that happening. Now the first thing that I already realized was an issue, that bracket's in the way. I'm running a manual transmission, so I don't need that. So I'm removing it. Also, there's a bit of plate sticking out there that I think I could trim up. I don't know if that's actually in the way, but it'll definitely help me get it in there a little easier, and it's not doing anything. So I'm gonna cut out a little bit of that sheet metal there and remove that sensor there. All right, let's take a look at where we're at. So if we look in the cab, you can see that plate on the ground there is where the manual transmission is supposed to stick up through. And I'd like the shifter to be about right there. On this transmission, to put the shifter there, there's about 9.5 inches between there and there. Here we are underneath the vehicle. You can see right here is the plate that we saw from the top. And here's the bell housing to the transmission. Now I can just about bolt this up. We're almost to the point where it would fit, take a bit more massaging, but the issue is I need this to be about 3 inches here in order to put the shifter right where I want it. So I need this to move about 3 inches this way, but the issue is that it'll be into the transmission tunnel. I would have to cut away the transmission tunnel in order to make that work. Rather than completely cutting out the transmission tunnel, I think it's time to start looking at the body lift again. If I'm able to move the body a little bit up, I can bring this a lot further down. One thing to keep in mind with this body lift is on a stock Explorer, these springs actually go underneath the axle. I decided to put the spring over the axle, which gives me quite a bit of lift, about 6 inches worth of lift, plus half of whatever the height of this axle tube is compared to the Explorer's 4 to 8.8 inch. So the rear right now has quite a bit of lift, and with the current lift springs that I have, the front's gonna be a bit lower than the rear. So I wanna see if it's possible with this body lift for me to fix two issues. What I'm going to attempt to do is put lift blocks under the body in the front, but not under the rear. I'm not exactly sure if that'll turn out well, but I'm gonna try that and see if that'll work, and then not only will that help me fit the Cummins, it'll also make it so the height of the front matches the rear a little bit better. Let's just see if that works or not. The way I'm going to make the spacers for the body lift in the front is I have this aluminum here. It's 2 inch, 1.5 inch, I don't know what it is. And I'm just gonna drill a hole through the center and cut it off. I'm gonna try just 1 inch to begin with. So I'm gonna cut off 2 1-inch blocks with a hole through the center for the body bolt, and we'll see how that works. think I found a final position for this engine. Now, technically, I could push it a couple more inches back. At that point, I would have to really start cutting into the firewall. I'd have to remove the dash, and then the back of the exhaust and a couple things would be in the cab. I don't really want to do that, so I think this is the position that I want this engine to be in. With the engine sitting like that, it'll put the shifter right about here, which is just about centered where I would need it. I'm probably gonna have to bend the shifter back a little bit to get it to fit perfect, but it should put it basically right in the middle there where I'd want it. I might even be able to retain the center console. And these Explorers, I don't believe they came with that center console in manual transmission, so that'd be really nice to actually have some cup holders. Now, in order to keep it here, rather than pushing it back a few more inches, I'm going to have to add about that much material. So I'm gonna have to add 4 or 5 inches of material. I can either add it here, or I can add it over there by the door. Haven't figured that out yet, but this thing will have to get some custom fenders. It'll have to get the fenders stretched a little bit and the hood stretched a little bit, but that's what we're looking at. If I stretch it by that 4 or 5 inches, then I should be able to fit the stock fan. Obviously this will be sitting higher once it's actually mounted to the body, but I should be able to keep the stock fan. I should be able to actually remove the rear valve covers and hopefully even the head if I needed to, so I'll be able to work on this car if I need to. And all I'm sacrificing is that it's gonna need custom fenders and a custom hood to do that. I would rather do that than have to remove the whole dash and push it back into the cab anymore. I think it's better to have to do a little bit of body work here than to have to do a bunch of work on the firewall and sit the engine back in the cab. That's the plan. All right, after probably 4 or 5 hours of screwing around with this engine, I think I finally figured out the dimensions I need in order to set it in here properly. So I put the body on just to make sure that I had the dimensions for the motor mounts just perfect. And now that I have that, I don't need the body anymore. So I'm going to pull the body back off. It's a pain in the butt to keep pulling it on and off, but I think it was worth it to put it on for now, just so that I could make sure that the engine was in the right spot. And once it comes off, that'll be the last time it's coming off again. I'll get the whole drivetrain mounted, I'll get the brake system run, the fuel system run, I'll get the frame boxed, and then body's back on for good. So the dimensions I ended up getting on this thing are, first, I wanted to know the front to back position of the engine. And so I made some marks on the chassis here and also on the engine there so that I know the front to back position. And these are pretty critical, so I did it in paint pen, and then I also center punched it to make sure that I don't lose that dimension. So that'll tell me where to put it front to back. The other thing that I figured out was that I actually think I need to offset the engine to one side by just a hair, exactly an inch, because this transmission tunnel and everything actually isn't perfect. It's not perfectly centered. So I will offset the engine slightly. It should still be well within the working limits of the U-joints for the rear end, so we should be fine in that regard. But now I need to get the body off. I'm afraid if I tried to do this with the body on, that I wouldn't have enough room and I wouldn't be able to work nearly as precisely. So it was definitely worth putting the body on just for one episode to make sure that it's positioned perfectly, but now I gotta take it off to make sure I get everything else perfect. So I really wanted to get the motor mounts done before I ended this video, but unfortunately I just don't think I'm gonna have time. So next video I'll try to get the entire drivetrain mounted and start working on the brakes, the fuel, and boxing the frame. If you stuck around this long, then thanks for watching, and like the video if you liked it, and subscribe and stick around if you want to see the rest of this build, and thank you for watching.